My name's Jake. I'm 28 now, but the story I'm about to share still makes my stomach twist like I'm a kid again. It's strange how something as simple as a birthday cake can stick with you, carving out a wound that doesn't really heal no matter how many years pass. I grew up in a family where favoritism wasn't whispered about or hidden. It was displayed right out in the open, almost like a family tradition. My younger sister, Lily, was the shining star, the one who could do no wrong. She was smart, yes, but more than that, she was my dad's pride and joy. And me? I was the afterthought, the one who got the smaller slice, literally and figuratively. I've always been the quieter one, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I learned early on that my words never carried the same weight as Lily's. If she forgot to do chores, I got blamed for not reminding her. If I excelled in something, it was brushed off as luck or coincidence. I remember once in middle school, I won second place in a science fair. I was so proud, standing there with my certificate and a goofy grin. When I brought it home, my dad's response was, "Well, Lily will get first place next year. You'll see." That was the pattern. My accomplishments turned into her stepping stones, while my mistakes turned into family anecdotes to laugh about at the dinner table. So when my birthday rolled around last year, I wasn't expecting much. Honestly, I've learned not to. But I still held on to this little flicker of hope that maybe this time, things would be different. My mom baked the cake. It was chocolate, my favorite, though I knew she only made it because Lily didn't like vanilla. Family came over, a few neighbors, and even one of Lily's friends, someone I barely knew. We all sang. The candles were blown out, and I stood there trying to soak in the moment, telling myself it was fine, that this was enough. Then came the cutting of the cake. I watched as slice after slice was handed out. Lily got one, of course, and her friend, who hadn't even said happy birthday to me, got one next. Then my dad looked at the plate in his hand, at the cake, and muttered, "There might not be enough for everyone." He paused, then added casually, "Jake can skip this time." Just like that. No hesitation. No second thought. The room was full of people, and yet it felt like the air was sucked right out of it. My mom didn't say anything, just looked down at the table. Lily laughed like it was some kind of joke. And me? I stood there, frozen, as a piece of my own birthday cake was handed to someone else. I don't know what burned more, my dad's words or the silence that followed them. Nobody spoke up for me. Not a single person said, "Wait, it's his birthday." It was as if I didn't even exist. I felt my throat tighten, that familiar lump that always shows up when you want to cry but refuse to give them the satisfaction. Instead, I swallowed it down, grabbed my jacket from the chair, and walked straight out the door. I heard someone call me ungrateful as I left, but I didn't turn back. I didn't argue. I just walked, the night air biting at my face, my chest heavy like I was carrying years' worth of moments just like that one. That was the first crack, the moment that forced me to really see how deep the pattern went. And as I walked down that dimly lit street, away from the laughter spilling out of the house, I knew this wasn't just about cake. It was about every single time they'd chosen someone else over me. Every single time I'd been told, directly or indirectly, that I didn't matter. And for the first time, instead of swallowing it, instead of pretending I was fine, a thought settled in the back of my mind. Maybe I was done playing their game. I didn't go back home that night. I walked for a long time, trying to process what had just happened, my phone buzzing in my pocket with messages I refused to look at. I ended up at a diner near the edge of town, sitting in a booth with a cup of coffee that went cold before I touched it. It wasn't about the cake. I kept telling myself that. It was about everything else it represented. That night was just another page in a book I'd been forced to read my whole life. By the time I got back to my apartment, I knew something inside me had shifted. I wasn't going to beg for scraps anymore, literal or metaphorical. The next few weeks were a blur of silence from me and half-hearted attempts from them. My mom called once, not to apologize, but to say, "Your dad didn't mean it that way. You're making too big of a deal out of nothing." Lily sent me a text. "You were so dramatic." It was just cake, Jake. My dad didn't reach out at all. The absence of his voice almost said more than anything else. And then, as if nothing had happened, life continued. But I started noticing things more clearly, like the way my dad's tone softened when he spoke to Lily, how he praised her for the smallest things. She got a part-time job at a clothing store, and suddenly she was responsible and hardworking. Meanwhile, I'd been working 2 jobs through college just to keep myself afloat. and not once had I heard those words directed at me. The favoritism wasn't subtle. Lily had just turned 23, and they'd surprised her with a used car for her birthday. They called it a family investment so she could get around easier. When I asked, calmly, genuinely curious, why I'd never received that kind of support, my dad laughed and said, "You always figured things out on your own, Jake. You didn't need help." As if my independence was some kind of excuse for their neglect. I bit my tongue, but inside I wanted to scream. Maybe I wouldn't have needed to figure everything out alone if you hadn't left me to. Things got worse during family gatherings. I started noticing how they'd use me as the punchline. My uncle once asked how work was going, and before I could answer, my dad cut in with, "Oh, you know Jake, still trying to find his place in the world." Everyone chuckled, including Lily, who added, "Yeah, at least I know what I'm doing with my life." She was working retail and still living at home rent-free, but somehow I was the one who hadn't figured things out. My jaw clenched so hard I thought I might break a tooth, but I just forced a smile. That's what I always did, forced a smile, swallowed the words. The manipulation was quieter but sharper. My mom would call, asking me to come to Sunday dinners. She'd phrase it like I was punishing them by staying away. "Your dad misses you, Jake. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." But when I gave in and showed up, it was always the same routine, me sitting there like an outsider, watching my dad dote on Lily. She'd hog the conversation, and any time I tried to talk about my work or plans, the subject would shift. I'd walk away from the table feeling smaller than when I arrived. It was during one of those dinners that the mask slipped completely. Lily had been talking about wanting to move out soon, though I knew she hadn't saved a dime. My dad leaned back in his chair, looked at me, and said, "Maybe you could help her get started. You're doing okay now, aren't you? Just a little loan, brother to sister." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Lily smiled like she'd already won, like this was just a formality. I asked, "And when did I become her safety net?" My dad's face hardened. "Don't talk back. We're family. Family helps each other." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy, because I knew he didn't mean family. He meant me. I was expected to help, to sacrifice, to give. Lily was expected to receive. That night, as I sat in my car outside their house, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white, I realized the roles we'd been assigned weren't accidental. Lily was the chosen one, the golden child. I was the reliable backup plan. And as much as I hated admitting it, I'd played right into their script for years, staying quiet, showing up when asked, swallowing my pride. But the birthday cake incident had cracked something in me, and this dinner hammered it wide open. I wasn't just dealing with favoritism anymore. I was being groomed to carry their burdens, to clean up their messes, while Lily got handed slice after slice, even when there wasn't enough to go around. And in that moment, sitting alone in the car, I started thinking for the first time not about how to endure it, but how to change it. A few months after that dinner, the real breaking point came. An act so blatant it stripped away any illusions I still had about where I stood in this family. It was a Saturday morning when my mom called. Her tone was syrupy sweet, the kind she used when she wanted something. "Jake," she began, drawing out my name like she always did. "We're having a little family get-together tonight. Nothing big, just close family and a few of Lily's friends. You should come." I almost said no. Every instinct told me to decline, to save myself the humiliation. But something in me still clung to that tiny, pathetic hope that maybe this time would be different. Maybe they'd surprise me. Maybe they'd finally notice I existed beyond being the one they could lean on when it was convenient. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived that evening, the house was already buzzing with laughter. I walked in, carrying a bottle of wine I'd picked up as a courtesy, and immediately felt the shift. Conversations quieted for a second, eyes darted to me, then moved away just as quickly. Lily's friends were sprawled across the living room, comfortable as if it were their house, not mine. My dad was in his usual chair, beer in hand, grinning at Lily like she'd hung the moon. I handed the wine to my mom. She smiled faintly and said, "Oh, you didn't have to bring anything." But instead of setting it aside for later, she placed it on the counter, unopened, while opening a bottle someone else had brought. That sting of invisibility settled in again. It wasn't until after dinner that the true betrayal unfolded. My dad cleared his throat, a signal everyone seemed to understand except me. "So," he announced proudly, "we have some exciting news." He looked at Lily, who beamed, and then back at me. Your sister is moving into a new apartment. We're all so proud of her. There was applause, clapping, cheers from her friends. I sat there stunned, trying to piece it together. Lily? Moving out. She hadn't mentioned anything about it before. Then my dad dropped the bomb. Of course, he continued. Jake has agreed to co-sign the lease. He's doing well now, and it's only right that he helps his sister get started. The room erupted in nods and approving murmurs, as if I had already said yes. My jaw literally dropped. Excuse me. I managed to choke out, my voice cutting through the noise. Lily smirked at me, that smug little curl of her lips I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. Don't act so shocked, Jake. You know it makes sense. You're responsible. Dad said you'd be happy to help. I felt my heart slam against my chest, heat crawling up my neck. I never agreed to that, I said firmly. The room went quiet. My dad's smile faltered, replaced by that look, half anger, half disappointment, that he'd perfected over the years. Jake, he said slowly, like he was scolding a child, don't make a scene. This is about family. Your sister needs stability, and you're in the best position to provide it. I looked around the room. Everyone was staring at me, waiting for me to cave. That was my role, wasn't it? To give in, to play along, to sacrifice. My mom wouldn't meet my eyes. Lily leaned back in her chair, confident that I'd fold. But I didn't. No, I said, louder this time, my voice shaking but steady enough. I'm not putting my name on anything for her. She's an adult. She can handle it herself. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then my dad's face hardened completely. Ungrateful, he spat. After everything we've done for you. We raised you, put a roof over your head, and this is how you repay us? Your sister deserves your support. That line, after everything we've done for you, hit me like a punch. Because what had they really done? They'd given me a childhood where I was overlooked, ridiculed, and dismissed. They'd given me a family where love was conditional and loyalty meant obedience. And now they wanted to use me as collateral for Lily's next chapter. I felt the weight of years pressing down on me. Every small slight and insult, every time they'd chosen her over me, crystallizing into this one moment. Something inside me snapped. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. You've never supported me, I said, my voice low but sharp. Not once. And now you expect me to risk everything for Lily? Forget it. Gasps. Murmurs. My dad's face went red, his hand gripping the armrest like he wanted to crush it. Lily rolled her eyes dramatically. You're being so selfish, Jake. It's just a signature. Why do you have to make everything about you? I stared at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see my sister. I saw the person they had molded her into, entitled, spoiled, convinced that the world owed her. And I realized in that instant that the betrayal wasn't just in their assumption. It was in the fact that they had planned it all without even asking me, fully confident I'd just play my role. I left that night without another word, the sound of their voices chasing me out the door. As I sat in my car, shaking with anger, I knew something fundamental had changed. The invisible thread that tied me to them, the one I'd clung to despite everything, had finally snapped. And for the first time, I wasn't just angry. I was done. The drive home that night felt endless, like every streetlight was spotlighting the fact that I no longer belonged anywhere. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, but my chest felt hollow, like something vital had been scooped out. I had always known, deep down, that I wasn't valued the way Lily was, but having it confirmed so publicly, being volunteered for a lifetime of debt and responsibility without even being asked, was different. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was betrayal. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the dark, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the window. I looked older, tired, like someone who had been fighting a battle he couldn't even name for years. The silence pressed against my ears, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself feel it all. The anger, the humiliation, the grief. I sat there until the sky outside began to lighten, and even then, I couldn't move. The days that followed were a blur. I went to work, went through the motions, but I was a ghost in my own life. Meals lost their taste, sleep came in fragments. My phone buzzed constantly, missed calls, voicemails, messages piling up. At first, I ignored them, but curiosity got the better of me one evening. Jake, you're being ridiculous, My mom's voice said on the voicemail, tired and impatient. Your dad only wants what's best for both of you. Stop making this harder than it needs to be. Then Lily's text. You've always been so dramatic. It's literally just a signature. Grow up. And my dad's final message, blunt and cold. If you can't step up as a brother, don't bother calling yourself part of this family. Each word chipped away at me. Not because I believed them, but because part of me had always wanted to. Part of me had always hoped that if I tried harder, if I stayed quiet, if I gave enough, they'd eventually see me. And now, staring at those messages, I realized they never would. I hit my lowest point about a week later. I was at work, sitting at my desk, staring blankly at an email I couldn't bring myself to finish. My chest felt heavy, my thoughts looping in circles. What was the point? Why keep trying to prove myself to people who had already decided I was nothing? I excused myself, locked myself in the bathroom, and just sat on the floor with my head in my hands. For a terrifying moment, I wondered if this was all there was for me. Being the shadow, the backup plan, the forgotten son. But as the hours passed, something inside me shifted. Not dramatically, not like a lightning bolt of clarity, but slowly, like a seed cracking open underground. I thought back to that night with the cake, to the silence that followed my dad's words. I thought about the lease, about how casually they had decided my future for me. And it hit me. If I kept playing along, if I kept trying to win their approval, this cycle would never end. I started taking small steps to distance myself. At first, it was just ignoring calls. Then I stopped going to Sunday dinners. When my mom texted me to say they were disappointed, I didn't reply. When Lily called to scream about how I'd ruined her apartment plans, I put the phone down and walked away. Each time, the guilt came, but it was weaker than before. Instead, I poured myself into my own life. I stayed later at work, started running in the mornings just to clear my head, even reconnected with an old friend I hadn't seen in years. It was strange at first, living without the constant background noise of their demands, but slowly, I began to breathe easier. Still, the pain lingered. Every now and then, I'd catch myself staring at my phone, half expecting an apology that would never come. At night, I'd lie awake, replaying every moment, every word, wondering if I'd been overreacting all along. That was the hardest part, not the betrayal itself, but the way it twisted my sense of reality, making me question whether I was allowed to feel hurt at all. But deep beneath the pain, a quiet determination began to take root. I wasn't sure what form it would take yet, but I knew I couldn't go on like this. If they saw me as nothing more than a resource, then maybe it was time I stopped being one. The rock bottom wasn't just about hitting the lowest point. It was about realizing there was only one way left to go. Up. The turning point didn't happen overnight. It never does. But little by little, I started to feel like I was clawing my way out of a pit I'd been trapped in for years. At first, it was small things. Waking up early and going for a run before work, finally tackling the pile of dishes that had been sitting in my sink, eating meals that weren't just takeout. It sounds mundane, but when you've been living under the shadow of people who make you feel worthless, every small victory feels like a rebellion. Work became my anchor. I had always been reliable at my job, but now I threw myself into it with a kind of focus I didn't know I had. Projects that used to overwhelm me, I started breaking down into steps. I stayed late, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see what I was capable of. And slowly, people noticed. My boss started giving me more responsibility, and for the first time, I didn't shy away from it. I embraced it. A few months after that disastrous dinner, I was called into a meeting I thought would just be another routine check-in. Instead, my boss smiled and said, "Jake, we've been really impressed with your performance. We'd like to promote you to team lead." The words hung in the air like they weren't real. Me, a leader? I walked out of that office with a new title, a pay raise, and something I hadn't felt in years, validation. With the extra income, I started fixing up my apartment. I bought a proper desk, framed some photos, even painted the walls a color I actually liked. For once, my space reflected me, not some shadow of who my parents expected me to be. I invited friends over, and for the first time, I didn't feel embarrassed to let them see where I lived. I could breathe in my own home. The more I built my own life, the less power their words had over me. When my mom called to guilt-trip me about missing another Sunday dinner, I didn't feel that same pang of guilt. When Lily texted to brag about her amazing new apartment She had somehow convinced another relative to help her secure. I didn't spiral. I just put the phone down and went back to my own life. It was around this time I reconnected with Marcus, an old friend from college. He reminded me of who I used to be before the constant criticism wore me down. We started meeting up for coffee, then dinners, and before I knew it, I had a circle of people who valued me for who I was. It felt strange, almost foreign, to be around people who actually listened when I spoke, who didn't dismiss my achievements or turn them into jokes. And with every passing week, I felt myself changing. The heaviness that had followed me for years started to lift. I began to see myself not as the backup plan, but as someone capable, someone who deserved respect. The very things my family had used against me, my independence, my resilience, my ability to figure things out on my own, were the qualities that were now helping me rise. The best part? Opportunities kept coming. A senior manager pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "You have a sharp mind for strategy. Ever thought about moving into project management?" It was like doors I never even knew existed were suddenly swinging open for me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't hesitate to walk through them. But even as my world expanded, there was always a shadow at the edge. Family ties, no matter how frayed, don't just vanish. My mom still left voicemails dripping with disappointment. My dad occasionally sent curt texts about how I was abandoning the family. Lily made passive-aggressive posts online that I knew were about me. They hadn't changed. They probably never would. The difference was that now, I wasn't shrinking under it. I was growing, building something that was mine. And deep down, I started to understand that success wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I'd been right all along, that I was worth more than the scraps they tossed me. Still, there was a part of me that wasn't satisfied with just walking away. Every time I thought back to that night, my dad's smug announcement, Lily's smirk, the way they all assumed I'd play my role, I felt a quiet fire building. I didn't want to just move on. I wanted them to see. I wanted them to finally understand that the son they dismissed, the brother they used, wasn't theirs to control anymore. And whether they liked it or not, the balance of power was starting to shift. It was during this new chapter of my life, when I was finally gaining my footing, that the pieces for something bigger started to fall into place. The rise wasn't just about me feeling stronger. It was about me finally seeing how much leverage I actually had, leverage I hadn't realized before. One of the first cracks in their carefully built illusion came through Lily herself. For someone who was always painted as the responsible one, her life outside the family glow wasn't quite as polished. I heard from a mutual acquaintance, someone who worked at the same store Lily had just left, that she'd been caught skimming money from the register. They didn't press charges, but she had been quietly let go. Of course, when she told the family, she spun the story differently. She had quit because she was too good for retail. My parents ate it up, praising her for knowing her worth. That's when I realized something important. The golden pedestal Lily stood on was built entirely on the narratives they chose to believe. Not on facts, not on achievements, on stories. And if the truth ever came out, that pedestal would crack. At the same time, my own career was expanding faster than I had expected. The promotion had been just the beginning. I found myself sitting in meetings with senior executives, presenting ideas that were actually taken seriously. One afternoon, my boss leaned across the table and said, "Jake, you have a knack for seeing the bigger picture. We're considering you for a project that could put you in line for a senior management role within the year." That night, I sat in my apartment, the city lights glowing through the window, and felt the weight of something I hadn't felt before. Power. Real power. The kind that didn't just make my life better, but could shift the balance in the family dynamic that had always been skewed against me. The timing of everything couldn't have been more ironic. Around the same period, I started getting subtle hints from my mom that my parents were struggling financially. She'd make offhand comments at dinner, little slips like, "Your dad's been so stressed with the mortgage," or "It's been hard keeping up with all of Lily's expenses." At first, I brushed it off as her usual guilt tripping. But when I dug a little deeper, quietly, through some old contacts who knew the property market, I learned that my parents had refinanced the house twice. They were stretched thinner than they wanted anyone to know. And then came the kicker. Lily's amazing new apartment wasn't going so well either. She'd landed in over her head, splurging on furniture and clothes she couldn't afford, and now she was barely scraping by. I knew this because one evening, out of nowhere, she texted me, "Hey Jake, could you spot me some cash until next month? Just a little. I'll pay you back, promise." I stared at that message for a long time. The sister who had laughed at me, who had smirked while my dad announced I'd co-sign her lease, was now coming to me directly for money. Not to dad, not to mom, to me. That's when it all started to click. For the first time, they needed me more than I needed them. My job was steady, my income was growing, and my independence had made me untouchable in ways they hadn't foreseen. Their golden child was starting to crack, and their foundation, financially and emotionally, wasn't nearly as stable as they made it seem. I didn't respond to Lily right away. Instead, I sat with the message, turning it over in my mind. They had always treated me as expendable, as a safety net they didn't have to thank. But now, with them in need and me in a position of strength, I saw something I'd never allowed myself to see before: the potential for control. And it wasn't just about saying no. It was about deciding when to say yes, and on whose terms. For years, they had dictated the rules. Now, I was starting to understand that I had the chance to flip the script entirely. That quiet fire inside me, the one that had been growing since the night of the cake, burned hotter than ever. I wasn't ready to make my move yet, but the board was set. I had pieces they didn't even know I held. And when the time came, I would make sure the game didn't play out the way they expected. The chance to make my move came sooner than I expected. It was late on a Wednesday when my phone lit up with my dad's name. For a moment, I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered, and his voice was different, lower, less commanding. "Jake," he started, not with anger, not with disappointment, but with something that sounded uncomfortably close to pleading. We're in a bit of a situation. Could you come by this weekend? We need to talk." If this had been a year earlier, I would have jumped at the chance to help, to prove myself. But now I leaned back in my chair, listening to the silence stretch before I finally said, "I'll think about it," and hung up. By Saturday, I showed up, not for them, but for me. I wanted to see it firsthand. The house I'd grown up in, once spotless and put together, now looked worn. Paint chipped along the windowsills, the lawn unkempt. Inside, the tension was thick. Mom sat at the kitchen table, wringing her hands, while Dad paced. Lily was there too, arms crossed, eyes darting between them like a spectator waiting for the main event. Dad cleared his throat, trying to summon the authority he used to command so easily. "We've hit a rough patch financially. The mortgage, some other expenses, things are tight. And Lily, well, she's struggling with her rent too." He gestured vaguely toward her, as if that explained everything. Then he looked straight at me. "You're doing well now. We thought maybe you could help us out. Alone, just to get things back on track." There it was. The moment they'd all assumed would come eventually. The golden child faltering, the parents cornered, and me, the expendable one, expected to step in. I let the silence hang, watching them squirm. My mom spoke next, her voice trembling just enough to tug at the edges of guilt. "Jake, it's not much. You'd barely even feel it. And you know, family helps family." That phrase again. Family helps family. But family had never helped me. I folded my arms, meeting my dad's eyes. "Interesting," I said slowly. "Because the last time we spoke about family helping family, it was about me co-signing a lease I never agreed to. Or the time you told me to skip my own birthday cake so Lily's friend could have some. Or when my accomplishments didn't matter because Lily would do better." I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of each memory sink into the room. Funny how family only seems to need me when it benefits you. My dad's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Lily rolled her eyes, muttering, "You're being so dramatic, Jake. It's just money." That was my opening. Calmly, without raising my voice, I said, "You're right, Lily. It is just money. And I've worked hard for mine. Harder than any of you ever gave me credit for. So if you're asking for help, it won't be on your terms. It'll be on mine." Their faces shifted, confusion, then shock. My mom blinked rapidly. "What do you mean?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "I'll consider helping, but not until I see some accountability. Lily, you tell the truth about why you lost your job. Dad, you admit that you've treated me like less than family for years. And Mom, you stop pretending that silence makes you innocent. Otherwise, you'll figure it out on your own." The room went dead quiet. For once, they weren't in control of the script. I was. My dad sputtered, "You can't just." Yes, I can, I interrupted, steady and calm. Because here's the difference. I don't need you anymore. But you clearly need me. So if you want my support, it comes with honesty and respect. If that's too high a price, then this conversation is over. It was the first time I'd ever seen them truly at a loss for words. Lily shifted uncomfortably, her confidence slipping. My mom's lips parted, but no excuses came out. And my dad looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, like the weight of years finally caught up to him. I stood, pushing my chair back slowly. Think about it, I said, heading for the door. Because I won't ask twice. As I walked out of that house, the same one I had left on my birthday with a jacket and a lump in my throat, I felt something I'd never felt before: control. The power they'd held over me for nearly 3 decades was gone. And now, the balance had shifted completely. The real question wasn't whether I'd help them. It was whether they could swallow their pride enough to ask me the right way. They didn't call right away. That silence was telling enough. My family wasn't used to being challenged, least of all by me. For weeks, I went on with my life. Work flourished. My new role in management solidified. And with the promotion came a salary that gave me breathing room I'd never had before. I filled my time with people who valued me, friends who cheered when I succeeded, colleagues who respected my voice. For once, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for my family's approval. But then, inevitably, the cracks in their world widened. One afternoon, my mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. Her face was drawn, her clothes less put together than usual. She stood in the doorway holding a folder of papers. "Jake," she said, her voice strained, "the bank is threatening foreclosure. We're months behind. We need you." I let her in, offered her a seat, and calmly flipped through the documents. They were worse off than I had imagined. Debts stacked, payments missed, interest rates climbing. Years of favoritism, of funneling resources toward Lily, of living beyond their means, had caught up to them. When I looked up, my mom's eyes were glossy. "Please, you're our only hope. You've always been so strong." That word, strong, wasn't lost on me. It was the first time she had ever used it to describe me. I leaned back, folding the papers neatly. "I told you before, Mom. If I help, it's on my terms. Has anything changed since then?" Her silence was answer enough. She couldn't bring herself to admit the truth, to acknowledge the years of neglect and manipulation. She left with the folder still in her hands, tears trailing down her cheeks. For once, I didn't chase after her. A week later, Lily called. This time, her tone was different, not smug, not entitled, but panicked. "Jake, they're going to lose the house. Dad's health isn't good, and Mom's falling apart. Please do something." I paused, letting her desperation sink in. "Why don't you handle it, Lily? You've always been the favorite. Surely Dad has faith in you." Her voice cracked. "I can't. I don't have the money. I never did." And there it was, the golden child stripped of her shine, admitting the truth at last. In the end, the foreclosure went through. They lost the house I grew up in, the very place where I had been dismissed, overlooked, and humiliated. I drove past it once, weeks after it was emptied, and saw strangers moving in. There was something poetic about it. The walls that had witnessed every slight against me now belonged to people who would never know my story. My parents moved into a cramped rental on the edge of town. Lily bounced from one apartment to another, each time a little worse than the last. The pedestal they'd placed her on had crumbled, and for the first time, they had to face the consequences of their choices. As for me, I never gave them money, not out of cruelty, but because I realized it wasn't my responsibility to clean up the mess they had made. They had gambled on Lily being their savior and dismissed me as irrelevant. And in the end, it was their own blind favoritism that undid them. The last time I saw my dad, months later, he looked smaller than I remembered. We stood outside, awkwardly silent, until he finally muttered, "You did good for yourself, Jake. Better than we thought." It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was the closest he'd ever come to admitting the truth, that he'd been wrong about me all along. I looked him in the eye, calm and steady. I always knew I would. And with that, I walked away, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I wasn't the forgotten son anymore. I was the one who had survived, risen, and built a life on my own terms. The cake, the cosign, the years of being overlooked, none of it mattered anymore. Because in the end, they had lost everything they held on to, while I had gained the only thing that ever mattered: freedom. And that was my final slice.